In Victorian Manchester, a city of 700,000 people lived in the shadow of industrial might, choking on coal smoke and working themselves to death for pennies a day, while grand municipal buildings showcased wealth and innovation. Just blocks away, families survived on potato hash and slept in four-penny lodging houses. Behind the facade of Cottonopolis was a world Friedrich Engels described simply as hell on earth. Here's what life was really like in the slums of Victorian Manchester. Hey, quick thing before we start. If you actually listen to these regularly, hit like or subscribe. I always wonder where everyone's at, so comment your city and what time it is. Weird to think some of you are having breakfast in London while I'm recording this at night here in the States. Alright, tonight it's Victorian Manchester, but wait, are you comfortable? No, really. Check. Pillows, blankets, the whole deal. Where we're going, you'll want to be settled. Your eyes crack open to darkness, not the comfortable darkness of your bedroom right now. This is different. This is the thick, suffocating darkness of a Manchester slum in 1900. The air is heavy with coal smoke that's crept through the cracks in the walls overnight. Your lungs feel it immediately. It's like breathing through a dirty rag soaked in soot. You're lying on, well, can you call it a bed? It's more like a pile of rags on a wooden floor. Your back aches from the hard surface. The rags smell of mildew and sweat. Bodies press against you. Other lodgers in this four-penny doss house. The breathing and occasional coughs of strangers form a ragged symphony in the darkness. This is way worse than my memory foam mattress at home, you think, trying to adjust your position without disturbing the person sleeping inches away. The first hint of grey light filters through a small window caked with grime. It's enough to make out the bare walls of the lodging house. No pictures, no decorations, just stained plaster and exposed beams. In the corner, a man coughs violently, the sound wet and worrying. Picture this, Manchester in 1900, the second largest city in England. Population, a staggering 700,000 people. Only London and Glasgow were bigger. But size isn't everything, right? Manchester was the world's first industrial city, literally the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. They even had a nickname for it, Cottonopolis. I'm not making that up. The city grew so fast that nobody planned for it. People just poured in from everywhere. England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, all cramming into hastily built houses looking for work. And boy, was there work. Just not the kind that kept you alive very long. You pull yourself up from your rags, wincing at the stiffness in your joints. Your stomach gnaws with hunger, but breakfast is a distant dream. Most people here live on 6p a day for an entire family. That's about $2 in today's money. For everyone, for everything. I spent way too long researching Manchester food prices from this period, like concerningly long. The standard meal for a poor family was potato hash, 3p worth of meat, and I'm using the term meat generously here, 2p of potatoes and a halfpenny of onions. All boiled together with plenty of water, which they called dip. Delicious, right? The floor beneath your bare feet is cold and damp. There's mud tracked in from yesterday, never properly cleaned. The walls of the building seem to sweat with condensation. This is Angel Meadow, which has to be the most ironic name possible for one of Manchester's worst slums. You know what's wild? Friedrich Engels, the communist guy who worked with Marx, he actually lived here in Manchester for a while. His dad sent him to work in the cotton industry, and Engels was so horrified by what he saw that he wrote a whole book about it, called the city Hell Upon Earth. I'd say he was being kind. As you make your way outside, the full sensory assault of Manchester hits you. The journalist Robert Sherrod described it perfectly in 1900. Wait, I'll just give you his exact words. What more sinister picture could the mind conjure up than the black depths of the Owell seen through iron gratings when the afternoon sun in Manchester fog and smoke hangs over Deansgate like a disk of living fire? That's how this place looks. The sun isn't the warm yellow, you know. It's a bizarre, fiery disk hanging in a perpetual twilight of fog and factory smoke. It's like living in a painting by someone who was really, really depressed. You start walking through streets caked with mud. Around you, people are moving, most looking as tired as you feel. Workers heading to factories, children who should be in school but instead will spend their day in those same factories, women with hollow eyes carrying infants. "You need a cab, mate," a voice calls out. You turn to see a handsome cab driver looking at you skeptically. His horse paws at the ground, seeming as anxious as its owner. "Going to Angel Meadow," you say. The driver snorts. "Not likely," he says flatly. "Not likely that I'll take my cab up there to have it bashed in with bricks." That's an actual quote, by the way. Sherrod tried to get a cab to Angel Meadow, and that's what the driver told him. Some neighbourhoods were so rough that cab drivers wouldn't even go there. Just flat out refused. Can you imagine your Uber driver being like, "Yeah, no, I'd rather not have my car destroyed, thanks." So you keep walking, passing through an area known as the Jewish Quarter. The atmosphere is one of fog and rags, with mud underfoot. People mutter at street corners, their faces gaunt with hunger and worry. The shops you pass are miserable little establishments with barely anything to sell. Ahead looms a massive structure, the assize courts and adjoining jail. It's an imposing pile of stone, looking more like a fortress than a place of justice. Behind those walls are cells, the lash, and even gallows. Close to 177,000 prisoners pass through the gates of Strangeways Jail every year. 177,000 people. That's almost the entire population of Providence, Rhode Island, passing through one jail every single year. But here's something that doesn't completely suck. Every morning at 6:30 in summer and 7:30 in winter, a group of ladies and gentlemen from various charitable societies gather at the prison gates. They're waiting for the prisoners to be released. They offer breakfast, conversation, prayer, and most importantly, help finding work. Small acts of kindness in a very unkind world. The smell hits you as you continue walking, a mix of industrial smoke, sewage, unwashed bodies, and the sickly sweet scent of cheap alcohol wafting from the doorways of dram shops, what they called bars or pubs. These places are already doing business, despite the early hour. For many, a quick drink is the only way to face another day in this place. You notice how many women are among the customers. In the smoke rooms of licensed houses, little else than racing results are being discussed. Betting on horses seems as common here amongst women as men. The Manchester police seem weirdly tolerant of gambling. During race week, card trick men are openly plying their swindles in the public omnibuses. You pause to watch one such scam in action. 3 cards being flipped and moved around on a makeshift table. A young lad is watching intently, convinced he can follow the Queen of Spades, except they're not using the Queen of Spades anymore. Find General Baden-Powell, the trickster calls out, using the hero of Mafeking as bait. Patriotism as the newest twist on an old scam. The boy puts down 30 shillings, a fortune for most people here, and of course loses it all. To what base uses, as Sherard put it, has come the hero of Mafeking. The morning fog is starting to burn off, but the smoke remains, hanging over the city like a shroud. Your throat feels raw from breathing it. Your eyes sting. Welcome to the capital of the Industrial Revolution, the workshop of the world, the place where modern capitalism was born, one coughing child at a time. You follow a group of women walking toward the factories. Some look as young as 12 or 13, though it's hard to tell. Malnutrition has a way of making age ambiguous. They're heading to work as cigar makers, tailoresses, or in the textile mills. You overhear two women talking about wages. "Jenny's gotten on at the cigar factory," one says, "starting at 5 shillings a week." "Better than nothing," the other replies with a shrug, "though she'll be lucky to see 12 shillings even after her apprenticeship. Better than the apron trade, 6p a dozen, and expected to make 48 a day. You do the math in your head. 48 aprons at 6p per dozen. That's 2 shillings a day, minus the cost of thread, light, and renting a sewing machine at 1 shilling 6p. How does anyone survive?" The factory buildings loom ahead, massive brick structures belching smoke from tall chimneys. The sound grows as you approach, the thundering, pounding, relentless noise of machinery, the clattering of looms, the hissing of steam, the shouting of overseers. People stream toward the entrances, their faces set in resignation. Another day, another few pennies, another step closer to the grave or the workhouse or the jail. You watch as a mother kisses her young children goodbye at the factory gates. They're all going in, she to one department, they to another. The youngest looks about 6 years old. The contrast is bizarre. This same Manchester has grand buildings, wealthy merchants, cultural attractions. The city that's created such tremendous wealth also houses people who live on potato hash and 6p a day. The same place that built magnificent municipal structures also built the doss houses where hundreds cram together each night. As the factory bells ring the start of work, you see the massive doors close, swallowing the crowds of workers. The streets grow quieter, left to those too young, too old, or too sick to work, or those who make their living in other ways, the hawkers, the beggars, the thieves, the prostitutes. The morning has barely begun, but already you feel exhausted. Your lungs hurt, your stomach growls, your head aches from the noise and the smoke, and somewhere in your mind a small voice reminds you, for thousands of people, this wasn't a historical tour or a bad dream. This was every day. This was life. As the sun struggles to pierce the industrial haze, you find yourself wondering how anyone survived this, how they found moments of joy, of connection, of meaning in the shadow of the smokestacks, how they raised families and built communities and somehow kept going. And the truth is, many didn't survive. Many were broken by this place, by the work, the poverty, the disease, the drink, but others did survive. They endured, they fought back, they organised, they created mutual aid societies and unions and friendly societies. The streets are momentarily quiet as most have gone to work, but soon they'll flood again with the changing of shifts, the constant rhythm of industrial Manchester, the flow of bodies from slum to factory and back again. The machine never stops, the city never truly sleeps. As you stand there, taking in the enormity of industrial Manchester, you catch the eye of an elderly man sitting on a doorstep. His hands are gnarled from decades in the factories, his face lined and weathered, but there's something in his eyes, a spark, a resilience. "First time in Angel Meadow?" he asks with a knowing look. You nod, unsure what to say. "You get used to it," he says with a small ironic smile. "Or you don't. Either way, time keeps moving. He gestures toward the smoking chimneys that dominate the skyline. Cottonopolis, he says with a bitter laugh. That's what the fancy folk call it. To us, it's just home. Home. Such a simple word for such a complicated place. A place of suffering and survival. A place where people lived and died, loved and lost, struggled and sometimes even thrived, all in the shadow of the Industrial Revolution. The old man coughs, a deep rattling sound that speaks of years of breathing coal dust and cotton fibres. Best be getting on, he says. Days wasting. As he hobbles away, you're left standing alone on the muddy street, the weight of Manchester pressing down like the smoke that hangs over everything. This is just the beginning of understanding what life was really like here. The day stretches ahead, full of more discoveries, more struggles, more glimpses into the lives of people who history often overlooks. The factory whistles sound in the distance, marking the passing of another hour in the relentless march of industrial time, and you realise you've only just begun to scratch the surface of what it meant to survive in the slums of Victorian Manchester. The factory whistles continue to blare across Manchester as you wander deeper into Angel Meadow. This place got its name back when it was actually a meadow, green, peaceful, a burial ground for the respectable poor. Now, it's one of the worst slums in Europe. The irony of the name isn't lost on you. You step carefully around a puddle of something that's definitely not water. The streets here aren't just dirty, they're deliberately neglected. City officials don't bother much with places like this. Why waste resources on people barely surviving? A small boy darts past you, barefoot despite the cold and damp. His feet are calloused and blackened from the filth. You notice his clothes, if you can call them that, more like rags barely held together, probably handed down through several siblings. "Penny for the guy, mister?" he asks, holding out a grimy palm. Before you can answer, a woman calls out sharply from a doorway. The boy scurries off without another word. The woman gives you a suspicious look before disappearing back inside. Strangers aren't welcome here, especially well-dressed ones who might be bill collectors, police, or worse, someone from the workhouse. You've read about workhouses in history books, but nothing prepares you for the fear they inspire in real life. The mere mention of the workhouse, or the spike, as locals call it, causes visible dread. Families would rather starve together than be separated in those prison-like institutions. There's a story going around about Kumpol Workhouse, where a pauper lunatic was beaten to death by an attendant. The case was so shocking that the Home Secretary issued a special order about reporting deaths of pauper lunatics in union workhouses. But people here aren't impressed, just another example of how little their lives matter to those in power. Your stomach growls, reminding you that breakfast would normally be happening about now. For the working poor of Manchester, breakfast is a luxury many skip entirely. Some children go to school or work without anything in their stomachs. Others might get a crust of bread or cold potatoes left over from yesterday. You decide to find somewhere to eat, if only to observe what passes for food here. Following your nose, you locate a small shop selling hot food. The smell is, well, not appetizing exactly, but it beats the general stench of the streets. Inside, people are crowded around small tables, hunched over bowls of steaming food. The air is thick with the smell of boiled potatoes and onions, with just a hint of meat. This is the famous potato hash, the staple meal for poor families. "What'll it be?" asks the woman behind the counter, eyeing you suspiciously. "Hash, please," you say, placing what you hope is the right amount of money on the counter. She scoops a ladleful of the mixture into a chipped bowl and slides it towards you with a chunk of bread that looks hard enough to build houses with. You take your meal to the corner and sit, examining what passes for nutrition here. The meat in the hash is unidentifiable, gristle and fat mostly, with the occasional stringy bit that might generously be called beef. The potatoes are decent enough, and the onions add some flavour. But it's the water, the dip as they call it, that bulks it up into something resembling a meal. A family sits nearby, mother, father, and 3 small children. They have a single bowl between them. The mother carefully portions it out, making sure each child gets something. The smallest amounts go to the parents. You've seen this before, adults going hungry so their children can eat. I actually found this in Robert Sherrod's reporting. He quotes from a Wesleyan mission report about food in Manchester slums. It was a common sight to see a large family sit down to a dinner of potato hash costing at the outside the sum of 6 pence spent as follows. Meat 3 pence, potatoes 2 pence, halfpenny onions with plenty of water, or as they call it, dip. 6 pence for an entire family's main meal of the day. But here's the kicker, and this explains why so many stayed hungry. Most slum dwellers got everything on credit, which meant they paid extra for the privilege of not having immediate cash. A halfpenny more on a loaf of bread, a farthing on sugar, another halfpenny on tea. For large families, this credit system cost them an extra 2 shillings a week, when most were only bringing in 16 or 17 shillings total. Do the math. That's over 10% of their income just in credit surcharges. That's like you paying an extra $400 a month on your groceries just because you can't afford to pay up front. The food is bland but filling. As you eat, you listen to the conversations around you. Most revolve around work. Who's hiring? Who's been laid off? Which factories have reduced hours because of the wars? Textile trade's gone to hell, a man says bitterly. Used to send thousands of pieces a week to the east. Now, nothing. The Boer War and other conflicts have disrupted trade, and it's the workers who suffer first. You remember reading about how Manchester's cotton industry was devastated during the American Civil War too, when the Union blockaded southern cotton. The ripple effects of wars fought thousands of miles away are felt acutely in the stomachs of Manchester's poor. After finishing your meagre meal, you head back out into the streets. The factories will break for lunch soon, and you want to see what the lodging houses look like in daylight. Angel Meadows' 4-penny lodging houses are infamous. For the price of 4 pennies, you get a bed for the night. Though bed is a generous term. Really, you're paying for floor space and perhaps some rags to lie on. You approach one of the larger doss houses, a looming brick structure with small dirty windows. A sign indicates it has beds for over 400 people. Hard to imagine that many humans crammed into this space. To your surprise, the Manchester lodging houses are actually cleaner and more orderly than those in other cities Sherrod visited. You learn that no intoxicating liquor is allowed to be brought in, though judging by the state of most lodgers, they've had plenty before arriving. A man sits on the steps, taking a break from whatever work he's found for the day. His face is weathered, eyes sunken with exhaustion. "First time in a doss house?" he asks, noticing your interest. You nod. "Could be worse," he says with a shrug. "Better than the Spike, that's for certain." "The Spike?" you ask, playing dumb. "Workhouse casual wards," he spits. "Bloody awful places. Heard about what happened at Kumpol? Poor bastard beaten to death by some attendant. Now they got special orders from the Home Secretary about reporting deaths." He shakes his head. "Like that'll change anything." As you chat, you notice a group gathering at a building down the street. The sign identifies it as part of the Wesleyan mission. "They do good work," your companion says, following your gaze. "Got a men's labour yard and casual ward. You can chop wood for your supper and bed." You decide to check it out. Approaching the central hall, the mission's headquarters, you see scores of men being interviewed by someone you later learn is Mr. Sackett, the head of this department. The system works differently than the workhouse. Here, men work before they're accommodated, chopping and tying firewood in the labour yard. 50 bundles earns you supper, a bed, and breakfast. As one mission worker puts it, they are not humiliated with the thought that they are receiving charity. It's an impressive operation. Last year they processed 738,000 bundles of firewood in this yard alone. Men are allowed to spend 2 nights in the Wesleyan casual ward while seeking work during the mornings. There's also a night refuge for women in Great Ancoat Street. Another group, the Aggressive League, works to waylay drunk men and convince them to reform. The name cracks you up. Imagine a bunch of zealous temperance workers physically tackling drunks to save their souls. Aggressive persistence is apparently their method. The Victorians didn't do subtlety. Speaking of drinking, the pubs, or dram shops as they're called, are starting to fill up as the lunch whistles sound. Despite the poverty, or perhaps because of it, Manchester has no shortage of places to drink. The doors of these establishments swing open, releasing bursts of noise, laughter, and the smell of beer and bodies. A group of women factory workers push past you, heading straight for one of the pubs. They'll have 30 minutes for lunch, and some choose to spend it with a quick drink rather than food. Can't really blame them considering the working conditions they'll return to. Cigar makers are known for drinking heavily. You remember reading that in the transcript. A girl working in the cigar trade earns between 5 and 12 shillings a week during her 3 to 5 year apprenticeship. A skilled worker might earn 17 to 20 shillings when working full-time. But full-time work is increasingly rare with the wars affecting trade. You follow the women into the pub, curious about this aspect of Manchester life. Inside, it's dark and smoky. The floor is sticky with spilled beer and tobacco juice. People are packed tightly around small tables, making the most of their brief break from the factories. At the bar, 2 women are discussing horse racing. They're comparing notes on the favourites for tomorrow's races at Manchester Racecourse. Gambling is as common among women here as men. Another fact from Sherrod's reporting. "Put a shilling on Red Admiral," one woman tells the other. "My Tom knows the stable boy, says the horse is looking prime." "Can't afford to lose a shilling," her friend replies. "Kids need shoes." "Can't afford not to try," the first woman counters. "A 10-to-1 payout would buy shoes for all your little ones and then some." The desperate mathematics of poverty gambling. When you have almost nothing, risking a little for the chance of something more feels rational. The wealthy call it vice or moral failing. The poor call it hope. You notice a man setting up a small table in the corner. He places 3 cards face down and begins a swift, practiced patter. It's the 3-card trick, a notorious swindle. The Manchester police seem remarkably tolerant of such obvious grifts. "Find the Queen," he calls out, but then corrects himself with a grin. "No, lads and lasses, today we're looking for the hero of Mafeking. Find General Baden-Powell and double your money." The Boer War has been going for months now, and the 217-day siege of Mafeking has made Colonel Baden-Powell a national hero. The fact that he's now being used to separate factory workers from their hard-earned wages is a special kind of cynicism. You watch as a young man confidently places 2 shillings on the table. He's sure he knows which card is Baden-Powell. Of course, he loses. The cards move faster than the eye can follow, manipulated by hands that have performed this trick thousands of times. Back outside, the lunch break is ending. Workers stream back toward the factories, their brief respite over. You decide to follow them, curious about the working conditions that define so much of life here. The textile mills dominate Manchester's economy, but there are countless other industries too. The tailoring trade employs 4,000 to 5,000 women in Manchester, and their average weekly wages don't exceed 9 shillings, even allowing for seasonal fluctuations. They work under the same conditions as the tailoresses of Leeds. You recall Sherrod's bitter reference to The Song of the Shirt, a poem written in 1843 about a seamstress living in wretched conditions, being sung nightly in hundreds of garrets and cellar kitchens throughout Manchester and Salford. You join the stream of workers heading toward a large factory building. The noise grows as you approach, a thundering, clattering cacophony of machinery that you feel in your chest as much as hear with your ears. At the entrance, a supervisor eyes you suspiciously, but says nothing as you slip inside with the crowd. The heat hits you first, a wall of hot, humid air thick with cotton fibers and human sweat. Then the noise overwhelms everything, the pounding of looms, the hissing of steam, the shouts of overseers barely audible above the mechanical roar. Women and children make up much of the workforce. They move with practiced efficiency between the machines, their hands never stopping. One slip could mean losing fingers or worse. There are no safety guards on these machines, no regulations to protect the workers. Accidents are common and compensation rare. You spot a young girl, no more than 12, deftly reaching into a spinning machine to clear a jam. Her thinness allows her to access parts of the machinery adults can't reach. Her face shows no fear, just the blank concentration of someone who does this dozens of times a day. The air is filled with cotton fibers. Cotton snow, they call it. Workers breathe this in for 10 to 12 hours a day, their lungs gradually filling with the debris of their labour. Many develop brown lung or byssinosis, a chronic, debilitating condition that slowly suffocates them from the inside. You don't need to be a doctor to spot the signs. The constant coughing, the shortness of breath, the pallor beneath the grime on their faces. Life expectancy for factory workers is decades shorter than for the middle and upper classes. Near the back of the factory floor, women are operating sewing machines, making clothing that will be sold for many times what they're paid to produce it. The mathematics are brutal. A woman making aprons can produce 48 a day at 6p per dozen. That's 2 shillings a day for Steve. Before deducting the cost of thread, light and the rental of the sewing machine at 1 shilling and 6p, left with just 6p for a full day's labour. How does anyone survive? As you watch, a supervisor marches over to a woman who's paused briefly to flex her cramping hands. His face is red with anger as he berates her for laziness. Around them, no one reacts, keeping their heads down, hands moving, avoiding becoming the next target. You slip back outside, lungs burning from the cotton fibres, ears ringing from the noise. The contrast between the grand municipal buildings downtown and these factories is stark. The wealth created here flows upward, leaving those who generate it with barely enough to survive. Back on the street, you notice a small crowd gathered around a man on a soapbox. He's talking passionately about workers' rights, about the need for strong unions, about the exploitation that drives Manchester's economy. They get rich on our backs, bricks," he shouts, pointing toward the city centre where the owners and managers live in comfort. "They send us to die in their factories, in their mines, in their wars. And for what? 6 pence a day and an early grave?" Some in the crowd cheer. Others look nervous, glancing around for police or factory spies who might report them. Organising is dangerous. You can lose your job, your home, even your life if you push too hard against the system. But things are changing. The unions are growing stronger. The socialist movement is gaining momentum. The workers are beginning to understand their collective power. The Manchester of 1900 is a city on the edge of transformation, though few can see it yet. As the afternoon wears on, you make your way toward London Road Station, following the path that Sherrard took. Along the way, you witness a scene that encapsulates the human cost of industrial Manchester, a scene the journalist himself described. A respectable workman is seeing his wife and young daughter off at the station. All three are crying openly as they say goodbye. The woman explains through tears, "We have never been parted before, and now we are to be separated for months and months. We have had to give over our housekeeping, and I am going back to my father." Her husband is a mason's labourer, earning 5 shillings and 2 pence an hour. Their rent was 5 shillings and 6 pence, an impossible mathematics that broke their family apart. The woman's poverty is revealed a moment later when she says, "Oh, but a cup of tea would do me good and put a little heart into me, but how can I afford the 4 pence? In the same compartment sits a tailor-master who earlier boasted that, supposing a girl's quick with her fingers, she can make 7 shillings a week at the buttonholes in my shop. Now he produces a flask and offers it to the crying woman. "Have a drop of scotch, my dear." This moment, this simple human interaction, speaks volumes about life in Manchester. The economic forces tearing families apart. The small kindnesses that make survival possible, the impossible choices people face daily. As the train pulls away, carrying the woman and child back to her father's home, you're left standing on the platform, surrounded by the sounds and smells of industrial Manchester. The sun is lowering in the sky, casting long shadows through the perpetual haze of smoke. Night is approaching, bringing new dangers, new struggles, and perhaps a few precious moments of rest for those lucky enough to have a bed to return to. The doss houses will fill soon with those seeking shelter from the coming darkness. You realise you've only begun to understand what survival means in this place. The day-to-day challenges of finding food, keeping warm, earning enough to pay the rent, the constant presence of illness, accident and early death, the small victories and devastating defeats that make up life in the shadow of the smokestacks. As you leave the station, you notice a group of children playing in a narrow alley using a stick and some rags to create a makeshift ball. Their laughter echoes against the brick walls, a reminder that even here, in this harsh landscape of industrial poverty, humanity finds ways to create joy. But the laughter stops abruptly as a factory whistle pierces the air. The shift is changing. The rhythm of Manchester continues its relentless beat. The factory whistles have fallen silent now, marking the end of the day shift. Workers stream out of the massive brick buildings, their shoulders hunched with exhaustion, faces grey with cotton dust and fatigue. The streets grow busy again as thousands make their way home, if you can call their lodgings home. You decide to follow a group of women walking toward Ancoats, another notorious slum district. They move slowly, their bodies worn down by hours of standing at machines. You can tell which industry they work in just by looking at them. The cigar makers with tobacco-stained fingers, the textile workers with bits of cotton clinging to their hair and clothes, the laundresses with reddened, cracked hands from constant exposure to harsh soaps and hot water. One woman catches you staring and gives you a weary smile. "First time in Manchester?" she asks. You nod and she gestures around. "Welcome to the workshop of the world," she says with tired sarcasm. "Not what you expected. I'm just trying to understand how people live here. You admit." She gives a bitter laugh. "Live? We don't live, love. We survive. There's a difference." Her name is Mary, and she works as a tailor's machinist, one of the better-paying jobs for women. She earns between 11 and 14 shillings a week, which is practically wealth compared to some. She tells you she's machining trousers that will be sold in fancy shops for 13 shillings a pair, while she gets paid sixpence for each one she completes. "Do the math," she says as you walk alongside her. "I make 25 pairs a week if I'm quick. That's 12 and 6. Shop sells them for, what's that, over 300 shillings, and I get 12 and 6. She shakes her head, too tired to even be properly angry anymore. This is just how things are. "Where do you live?" you ask. "Got a room," she says. "Share with my sister and her kid. 5 and 6 a week. 5 shillings and sixpence just for rent. This hits me hard when I researched it. When most women were making 9 to 12 shillings a week, spending 5 and 6 on rent alone left almost nothing for food, clothing, heating, lighting, everything else. You remember a scene from the transcript. A mason's labourer earning 5 and 2 pence an hour, whose family had to separate because they couldn't afford their rent of 5 and 6. The mathematics of survival in Manchester are brutal and unforgiving. Mary leads you down a narrow street lined with identical brick houses. They stand shoulder to shoulder. No gardens, no space between them, just an endless wall of grimy brick broken by doors and small windows. These are the famous back-to-backs, houses built literally back-to-back to save space, with rooms stacked vertically instead of horizontally. 6 families in our house, Mary explains as she stops before one of the identical doors. 2 rooms each if you're lucky, some just got the one. Landlord keeps dividing them up, more rent that way. The door opens to a narrow hallway with steep stairs leading up. The smell hits you immediately, a mixture of cooking, damp human bodies and the ever-present coal smoke that permeates everything in Manchester. "We're top floor," Mary says, leading the way up the creaking stairs. "It's cold in winter, hot in summer, but at least we don't get the rats as bad as the ground floor. Each landing has 2 doors leading to separate lodgings. You can hear life happening behind them. Children crying, a couple arguing, someone coughing that deep, wet cough that speaks of cotton lung or tuberculosis." Mary's room, when you reach it, is small but meticulously clean. There's a single bed that she presumably shares with her sister and niece, a small table with 2 chairs, a chest for clothes, and a tiny fireplace where a kettle sits cold. A curtain divides the room, behind which you assume is another small space, perhaps for washing or food preparation. "Sister's on night shift at the factory," Mary explains. "Niece is at the match factory, won't be home till late." Match factories are notorious for phosphorus poisoning. Phossy jaw, they call it. The workers' jawbones literally decay while they're still alive, causing unimaginable pain. But the factories pay, and when you're poor in Manchester, you take what work you can get. Mary stokes the small fireplace, trying to bring some warmth into the room. "Can't afford much coal," she says apologetically, "just enough to heat water for tea." The windows are covered with paper to keep out drafts. Glass alone isn't enough against the bitter Manchester weather. The walls show water stains where rain has seeped through the poorly maintained roof. "How much do other people pay for rooms?" you ask, curious about the rental market in 1900 Manchester. Depends, she says, putting the kettle on the growing flames. Single room in a cellar might go for 2 shillings. Proper 2-room lodging like this, 5 to 7 shillings typically. More if it's a better street, less if it's Angel Meadow or the worst parts. She gestures for you to sit at the small table. Of course, some people can't afford even that. They go to the doss houses, 4p a night for a bed, but you can't make a home there. Home. Such a powerful concept when you have so little else. Mary has made this tiny space as homely as possible. A cheap print on the wall, a small vase with what look like hand-picked wildflowers, a crocheted doily on the table, small touches of humanity in an inhumane system. The kettle begins to whistle, and Mary makes tea in a chipped pot. The tea is weak, the leaves clearly reused several times to make them last, but it's hot and marginally better than the water that comes from Manchester's questionable pipes. Sugar? She offers, showing you a small bowl with what can't be more than a tablespoon of sugar in it. No, thank you, you say, understanding this is a precious commodity you shouldn't deplete. As you sip the tea, Mary tells you about working in the textile industry. The Manchester cotton mills were once the wonder of the industrial world, but the wars have hit trade hard. Houses that used to send thousands of fabric pieces weekly to the east now send nothing at all. My cousin got laid off last week, she says. Whole factory shut down. Hundreds of women with no work, no warning, no nothing. What will they do, you ask? Mary shrugs. What can they do? Try to find other work, go to the doss houses if they can't pay rent, to the workhouse if they're desperate enough, or... She doesn't finish, but you both know what the unspoken options are. Crime, prostitution, starvation. This brings up something I found disturbing in my research. Do you know the stat in the transcript? Close to 177,000 prisoners pass through the gates of Strangeways Jail every year in a city of 700,000. That's 1 in 4 people. Not all at once, of course. Many were repeat offenders and many were just short stays, but still the scale of incarceration is mind-boggling. And according to the secretary of the Discharged Prisoners Aid Society, in nearly every case which the society has had to deal with, intemperance was the primary cause of the prisoners' downfall. Drinking to escape the horrors of industrial poverty, then crime to support the drinking or due to its effects. A vicious cycle. A knock at the door interrupts your conversation. Mary opens it to reveal a small girl, perhaps 9 or 10, holding a basket covered with a cloth. Mum says, can she borrow a cup of tea leaves? The girl says, her eyes darting curiously to you. She'll give them back tomorrow when Dad gets paid. Course, Lucy, Mary says, taking a pinch of already used tea leaves and wrapping them in a scrap of paper. How's your mum's cough? Same, the girl says, with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a child who's seen too much illness. Doctor says she needs better food and rest. She gives a small, adult snort that has no place coming from a child's mouth. Might as well say she needs a castle and a carriage. Mary slips something else into the girl's basket, a small heel of bread you didn't notice before. Tell her I had extra, she says firmly when the girl starts to protest. After Lucy leaves, Mary explains. Her mum's got the consumption. Dad works at the docks when there's work. 3 little ones besides her, they're good people, would do the same for me. This is how survival works in Manchester's slums. Nobody has enough, but they share what little they have. A cup of tea leaves, a heel of bread, watching a neighbour's children, tending the sick. Small acts of community that make the unbearable slightly more bearable. As evening deepens, Mary needs to prepare for her sister and niece's return. You thank her for the tea and hospitality, promising to visit again. Back on the street, the gas lamps have been lit, casting pools of yellowish light that barely penetrate the Manchester fog. Evening brings a different energy to the slums. Those who work day shifts are home, tired but briefly free. The pubs are filling up, the warm glow from their windows and the sound of music and voices offering a temporary escape from the grim reality outside. You pass a group of men heading into one such establishment, the Factory Workers' Arms. They look like they've come straight from the foundry, their faces still streaked with soot, hands rough and calloused. Despite their obvious exhaustion, there's an air of relief about them. They've survived another day. "Joining us, mate?" one calls to you. First round's on Jim. His wife had another baby yesterday. The man called Jim grins proudly, despite the bags under his eyes. Sixth one, another boy. The others clap him on the back with genuine congratulations, though you can't help wondering how Jim will feed another mouth on a factory worker's wages. Still, life goes on. Babies are born, people marry, families grow, even here in the shadow of the smokestacks. You decide to follow them in, curious about how the working class spend their limited leisure time. The pub is crowded, hot and loud. Men and women of all ages pack the space, creating a din of conversation that competes with a man playing fiddle in the corner. The drinks are cheap and strong, designed to provide maximum escape for minimum cost. You notice how quickly people drink, like they're trying to outrun their thoughts. In one corner, you spot a heated discussion about horse racing. Several men are poring over racing forms, pooling their knowledge and meagre betting money. "Manchester police turn a blind eye to gambling," says a voice beside you. You turn to see an older man nursing a pint of dark beer. Not like in Liverpool where they crack down. Here, you can bet openly. "That a good thing?" you ask. He shrugs. Depends who you ask. Gives people hope, doesn't it? Dream of a big win to change everything. He takes a long drink. Course the bookies get rich while the rest of us stay poor. But for a moment, that moment when your horse is leading, you're as rich as the Queen. Across the room, a fight nearly breaks out when someone accuses another of cheating at cards. Friends intervene, pulling the men apart. The incident blows over quickly, the community policing itself. Nobody wants the actual police coming in and ruining everyone's brief escape. Near the bar, a group of women factory workers are celebrating something. Their laughter rises above the general noise as they clink glasses. One stands on a chair and makes a toast. To Mary Evans, 10 years in that hellhole, and now she's getting out, getting married and moving to her Tom's place in the country. A cheer goes up. Escape from Manchester is worth celebrating, even if it's just trading one form of dependence for another. For women, marriage can be both prison and salvation, depending entirely on the husband's character and earnings. You notice a table in the back where serious-looking men are talking in low voices. From snatches of conversation, you realise they're union organisers planning their next move against one of the larger factories. They're careful, watchful, aware that spies might be anywhere. The labour movement is growing stronger, but it's a dangerous game. Workers who organise risk everything. Companies have spies, hired thugs, and the law on their side. Still, conditions are so bad that more and more are willing to take the risk. As the evening wears on, songs break out. Old folk songs from Ireland, Scotland, Wales and the English countryside, places many of these workers or their parents left in search of factory work. Songs of home, of lost love, of better days. For a few minutes, the hard edges of Manchester life soften under the influence of music, alcohol and shared experience. But all too soon, the landlord calls time. The pub will close, sending its patrons back to their crowded rooms, shared beds, and brief sleep before another day in the factories. Outside, the night has fully settled over Manchester. The smoke and fog create a thick blanket that muffles light and sound. Gas lamps create islands of dim yellow illumination, between which lie pools of absolute darkness. These dark spaces are dangerous. Robberies are common. Drunks might be beaten and relieved of whatever coins remain in their pockets. Women hurry in groups for safety, even those engaged in the oldest profession who have no choice but to work these dangerous streets. You follow a family heading home, father, mother, and 3 small children who should have been in bed hours ago but had nowhere to go while their parents worked. The youngest, a girl of perhaps 4, is asleep in her father's arms, her head lolling against his shoulder. "We'll be home soon, love," the mother says, urging the other 2 children to hurry. "Mind the puddles now." Home is a single room in a crumbling building. As the door opens, you glimpse the interior. 1 bed for all 5 of them, a small table, a hearth with no fire this late at night. The walls are damp with condensation. The ceiling sags ominously. But it's theirs, at least for now, as long as they can pay the rent. Not everyone is so fortunate. As you continue walking, you pass people bedding down in doorways, under bridges, in the shelter of market stalls, the truly destitute who can't even afford the 4 pence for a doss house. Near the river, the polluted earwell that Sherrod described as seen through iron gratings when the afternoon sun in Manchester fog and smoke hangs over Deansgate like a disk of living fire. A group of children are still awake, searching for anything valuable in the mud of the banks. "Find anything good?" you ask one boy who can't be more than 8. He holds up a sodden piece of coal triumphantly. "Enough for morning fire," he says. Then, more quietly, "If you're looking for Maggie's girls, they're under the bridge. 6pence for a quick one." You're shocked by his matter-of-fact tone, by the casual way he assumes you're looking for prostitutes, by how normal this is in his world. Child labour, child prostitution, child poverty. The most vulnerable suffer most in industrial Manchester. "Just exploring," you say, "trying to understand how people live here." The boy laughs, a harsh adult sound. "Live? Nobody lives here, mister. We just don't die." It's eerily similar to what Mary said earlier. Not living, just surviving, not dying. The bar for success set at its most basic level. As midnight approaches, even the streets begin to empty. Night shift workers head toward factories and warehouses, while day workers collapse into whatever passes for a bed, stealing a few precious hours of rest before it all begins again. You find yourself back near Angel Meadow, where the doss houses are now full. Through windows you can see bodies packed tightly on floors, on benches, on narrow cots. Humanity warehoused like the cotton that drives Manchester's economy. Outside one such establishment, an old woman sits bundled in rags, rocking slightly. She looks up as you pass, her face a map of hardship etched over decades. "No room at the inn," she says with grim humour. "Not for those without the 4 pence. You're spending the night out here, you ask, concerned. The night is cold, damp and dangerous. She shrugs. "Not my first night on the cobbles, might not be my last, unless it is, in which case, problem solved." Her fatalism is startling but understandable. At her age, having survived decades in industrial Manchester, what can still frighten her? She's seen children die of preventable diseases, men crushed in industrial accidents, women worked to exhaustion then discarded. She's lived through economic booms that never reached the poor and busts that hit them first and hardest. "God's waiting room, this city," she says, looking around at the dark streets. "Just some of us get called sooner than others." As you leave her to her philosophical musings, you notice the factories never truly go silent. The night shift keeps some of them running 24 hours a day, the distant thrum of machinery a constant soundtrack to Manchester life. The moon, when it briefly appears through a gap in the smoke and clouds, seems alien and distant, as though even it wants nothing to do with what humans have created here. The contrast between its cold, clean light and the grimy streets below couldn't be starker. Tomorrow, it all begins again. The day shift workers will rise before dawn, eating whatever meagre breakfast they can afford. Children will head to factories, workshops, or if they're lucky, school. Women will report to textile mills, cigar factories, and tailor shops. Men will go to foundries, construction sites, docks, and warehouses. The great machine of industrial Manchester will continue its relentless operation, creating vast wealth for a few, while the many simply try to survive another day. And yet, despite everything, despite the poverty, the exploitation, the dirt, the disease, people endure. They create families, communities, moments of joy. They share what little they have. They tell jokes, sing songs, fall in love, dream of better days. The human spirit, it seems, is harder to crush than even the harshest industrial city can manage. As you seek shelter for what remains of the night, this thought provides a small comfort against the overwhelming evidence of suffering you've witnessed. Tomorrow will bring new insights into how life functions in this remarkable, terrible place, this engine room of the British Empire, this workshop of the world, this hell upon earth that somehow thousands still call home. Morning breaks over Manchester like a half-hearted apology. The sun, what little of it penetrates the smoke and fog, brings no warmth, just enough light to remind everyone it's time to start again. The factories are already humming, many never stopped. You find yourself in a small cafe near the market where working people grab quick meals before heading to their shifts. The food is cheap and filling, mostly bread and potatoes with small amounts of meat for those who can afford it. The tea is strong enough to dissolve the spoon, necessary fuel for bodies that must work 12 or more hours today. A woman at the next table is feeding her children, two small boys who look too young for school, let alone work, though you suspect that's where they're headed. She carefully divides a single portion between them, taking nothing for herself. "Eat up now," she tells them. "Need your strength for the mill." As they eat, she notices you watching and gives a tired smile. "First day?" she asks, assuming you're a new worker. "Just visiting," you admit, trying to understand how people live here. She looks at you like you've said something incomprehensible. "Live? We don't live, love. We work, we sleep, we try not to die. That's all." It's the third time you've heard this sentiment expressed in almost identical words. Not living, just not dying. Survival as the baseline for success. "Boys started at the mill last month," she continues, nodding at her children. 6 and 8 they are, too young really, but their father's dead, accident at the foundry, and someone's got to bring in wages. Child labour laws exist in 1900 but are loosely enforced, especially when desperate families need every penny. Mills and factories prefer children for certain jobs. Their small hands can reach into machinery to clear jams or clean moving parts, tasks too dangerous for adults. Children earn a fraction of adult wages, making them desirable employees. "They're good boys," she says with fierce pride. "Never complain, even when they're dead tired. Bring home 4 shillings a week between them. Not much, but it's the difference between eating and not. 4 shillings, that's the price of childhood in industrial Manchester. The opportunity to learn, to play, to grow naturally, all sacrificed for basic survival." After breakfast, you decide to learn more about how children experience Manchester life. You head toward a school located in one of the slightly better working-class districts. Not all children work. Education is technically compulsory, though economic necessity often trumps legal requirements. The school is a stark brick building with small windows and an austere playground of packed dirt. Children file in, some clearly underfed, many in clothing that's patched and repatched. Their faces show a mix of childhood innocence and premature aging, eyes that have seen too much, too soon. The headmaster, a stern but not unkind man named Mr. Wilkins, allows you to observe classes after you claim to be researching educational methods. The classrooms are overcrowded, with children packed onto benches. The emphasis is on basic literacy, numeracy, and above all discipline, preparing children for lives of factory work and obedience. Our greatest challenge, Mr. Wilkins tells you during a break, is simply getting them here. When a family must choose between education and eating, it's no choice at all. We lose them to the mills, the mines, the street trades. He sighs, watching children play in the yard, their games surprisingly boisterous despite their circumstances. Then there's the health issues, tuberculosis, rickets, chronic malnutrition, children falling asleep in class because they work night shifts or share beds with multiple siblings. How can they learn under such conditions? A small girl approaches, tugging at Mr. Wilkins' coat. "Sir, Tommy's fainted again," she says matter-of-factly. The headmaster nods, unsurprised. His family was evicted last week. I suspect he hasn't eaten since yesterday's school meal. He excuses himself to attend to the child, leaving you to ponder the normality of children collapsing from hunger in this wealthy industrial nation. After leaving the school, you head toward the Wesleyan Mission's central hall that you glimpsed yesterday. Charity organisations are the main safety net in Victorian Manchester, stepping in where government action fails. The central hall is a bustle of activity. Here, the Wesleyan Mission coordinates its many programmes: the men's labour yard, the casual ward, the night refuge for women, the aggressive league that targets drunkenness, and more. Their annual report fills over 300 pages. A testament to both their dedication and the overwhelming need they address. You meet Mr. Sackett, mentioned in Sherrod's reporting as the head of the men's department. He's interviewing applicants for the labour yard, homeless or unemployed men seeking the chance to earn their keep by chopping firewood. Our system differs from the casual ward in the workhouses, he explains during a break. Our men work before they're accommodated, which is as much as to say that they pay in advance for what they get. They aren't humiliated with the thought that they're receiving charity. You ask about the success of this approach. I have a high admiration of the class that come into our hands, he says with genuine respect, and of their anxiety to work. Last year, 738,000 bundles of firewood were chopped and bundled in the Hood Street labour yard. That number is staggering, a glimpse into both the scale of need and the willingness of people to work when given the opportunity. These aren't the lazy, shiftless poor of middle-class mythology. They're people desperate for dignified ways to survive. You follow Mr. Sackett to the labour yard itself, a large space where dozens of men are hard at work, chopping, splitting and bundling firewood. The system is simple. Chop and tie 50 bundles by 5 p.m. and you've earned supper, a bed for the night and breakfast the next morning. The men work with quiet determination, some clearly experienced labourers temporarily down on their luck, others looking less accustomed to physical work, perhaps clerks or shop assistants who've lost their positions, all united by immediate need. Many have skills and trades, Mr. Sackett tells you, but work is inconsistent, especially with the wars affecting trade. We allow men to stay 2 nights while seeking employment during the days. The difference between this and the dreaded workhouse is striking. Here there's an atmosphere of mutual respect. The men aren't treated as morally deficient paupers, but as workers temporarily in need of assistance. It's a small but crucial distinction that preserves dignity. From the labour yard, you visit the Night Refuge for Women in Great Ancoats Street, another Wesleyan mission programme. The refuge offers safe overnight accommodation for women who would otherwise be on the streets, vulnerable to violence and exploitation. Mrs. Porter, who oversees the refuge, shows you the dormitory-style rooms with their neat rows of narrow beds. "We can accommodate 50 women and children," she explains. "We're full every night with more turned away. The need far exceeds our capacity. The women who stay here come from various circumstances: workers between lodgings, women fleeing abusive husbands, mothers with children evicted for rent arrears, young women newly arrived in Manchester seeking work. Many are in temporary crisis," Mrs. Porter says. "A week's unpaid wages, a sudden illness, an unexpected expense, that's all it takes to lose your lodgings when you're living on the edge. We provide a safe landing, a chance to stabilise before they fall further." As you talk, a young woman enters, carrying a baby wrapped in a thin blanket. Her face is tear-streaked, her clothes respectable but worn. Mrs. Porter excuses herself to speak with her privately, but you overhear enough to understand. The woman's husband has died, leaving her without income or support. The landlord has already rented their room to another family. She has nowhere to go. This scenario plays out countless times daily across Manchester. The absence of any meaningful social safety net means a single misfortune can catapult a family from precarious stability into complete destitution. Later, you visit another charity initiative, a soup kitchen run by a coalition of churches. Long lines have formed outside, people of all ages waiting patiently for what might be their only hot meal of the day. The atmosphere is subdued, marked by the particular quiet dignity of those who never expected to need charity. A volunteer named George, who ladles soup into bowls with mechanical efficiency, tells you they serve over 500 meals daily. "Used to be mostly single men," he says. "Now we see whole families. The textile trade suffering with the wars. Houses that sent thousands of pieces weekly to the east now send nothing. Workers are the first to feel it." George has worked in the soup kitchen for 3 years. He was once on the other side of the counter, a skilled machinist laid off during a previous economic downturn. "I know what it's like," he says simply, "to work hard all your life and still end up hungry." As the afternoon progresses, you decide to visit one of Manchester's immigrant communities. The city's industrial growth attracted not just rural British workers, but people from across Europe and beyond, each group developing its own survival strategies within the larger struggle. The Jewish quarter, which Sherrod mentioned passing through, has its own distinct character, a community simultaneously integrated into Manchester's economy, yet maintaining its separate identity and mutual support systems. In a small workshop off a narrow street, you meet Isaac, a tailor who employs several family members making men's suits. The space is cramped but meticulously organised, with bolts of fabric stacked along one wall and a row of sewing machines along another. "Business is not what it was," Isaac tells you, measuring cloth with practised precision. "The war affects everyone, but we manage. Our community looks after its own." This is a crucial survival strategy in Manchester. Tight-knit ethnic and religious communities that pool resources, share information about jobs, and support members in crisis. The Jewish community has established its own charitable organisations, loan societies, and educational programmes, parallel structures to navigate a system often hostile to outsiders. Isaac explains how recent immigrants typically start at the bottom: sweatshop work, street vending, rag collecting, before gradually establishing themselves in trades or small businesses. "My father sold buttons from a cart when he first came," he says with pride. "Now I have this workshop. My son studies bookkeeping at night school. Each generation climbs a little higher." This pattern of gradual advancement through generations is common among immigrant communities with strong family and community bonds. It's a long-term survival strategy that requires enormous sacrifice from the first generation. As you leave the Jewish quarter, you notice a group gathering outside a meeting hall. A hand-painted sign announces, "Workers meeting tonight. All trades welcome. Unity is strength." This is another form of collective survival, the growing labour movement. As individual workers have almost no power against factory owners, they're increasingly organising along trade lines and across industries. Inside the hall, about 100 people have gathered, mostly men, but with a significant number of women too. The atmosphere is charged with purpose. These aren't dejected victims, but workers actively fighting to improve their conditions. The speaker, a weaver named Robert, addresses the crowd with passionate intensity. They tell us we should be grateful for our jobs, grateful for 12 hours of danger and exhaustion, grateful for wages that don't feed our children. Well, I say it's the owners who should be grateful for the wealth our hands create, for the profits built on our broken bodies. The crowd responds with cheers and applause. The message resonates because it speaks to their daily experience. They know who creates Manchester's wealth and who reaps its benefits. Alone, we are nothing, Robert continues. Together, we have the power to shut down every mill, every factory, every warehouse in this city. Without our labour, their machines are just metal and wood. Never forget that power. This is the beginning of a transformation, workers recognising their collective strength and organising to demand better conditions. It's a slow, dangerous process, fraught with setbacks. Union organisers risk blacklisting, violence and imprisonment, but the momentum is building. After the formal meeting ends, smaller groups form to discuss specific issues. A planned strike at one factory, fundraising for workers fired for organising, coordinating with unions in other cities. There's a sense of purpose and solidarity that stands in stark contrast to the isolated struggle for survival you've witnessed elsewhere. A woman named Sarah, who works as a power loom weaver, explains the practical realities. We're asking for a halfpenny more per piece and safety guards on the machines. Lost 3 fingers last month in our section alone. They'll fight us hard, already threatening to bring in workers from outside. But we're prepared. The whole mill stands together this time. This isn't just about wages, it's about human dignity, about being seen as people rather than disposable components in the industrial machine, about having some control over the conditions that define their lives. As evening approaches, you make your way toward Deansgate, one of Manchester's main thoroughfares, where the stark divisions of the city become most visible. Here, the commercial establishments that serve the middle and upper classes stand in proximity to the poverty just blocks away. The Palatine Hotel, mentioned in Sherrod's description of the view to the River Irwell, represents one face of Manchester, the prosperous commercial city of merchants, manufacturers and professionals. Its well-lit windows and elegant facade seem to belong to a different world than Angel Meadow or Ancoats. From here, you can see what Sherrod described, looking through iron gratings to the black depths of the Irwell while the setting sun appears as a disk of living fire through the perpetual fog and smoke. It's a haunting image that captures the environmental devastation of industrial Manchester, the polluted river, the smoke-filled air, the constant haze that filters all light into something alien and unnatural. As darkness falls, you notice how the city segregates itself not just spatially but temporally. The commercial and financial districts empty as offices close. The more prosperous residential areas settle into domestic evenings behind drawn curtains. Meanwhile, the slums enter their most active and dangerous phase. You return to Angel Meadow as night takes hold. The doss houses are filling again, those who can afford the 4p securing their spots for the night. Outside, those without even that small sum gather in doorways or under bridges, creating makeshift communities for mutual protection. The pubs are doing brisk business, offering light, warmth and temporary escape. Music spills into the street from one establishment, a folk song about lost rural homes that carries a particular poignancy in this urban wasteland. Near the entrance to one doss house, you meet an elderly man named William, who's been in Manchester for over 40 years. He came from a small village in Yorkshire during the cotton boom, believing the city offered opportunity and advancement. Reality proved harsher. Or used to be worse, he tells you, which is difficult to imagine. Back in the 40s and 50s, now that was hard times. No regulations at all then. Children as young as 5 in the factories. No limits on hours, no safety measures, nothing. He's right. Conditions have improved somewhat since the mid-19th century. Various factory acts have gradually imposed minimal regulations on working hours, child labour and safety. It's a reminder that even this grim reality represents progress from the early industrial period. Lot of good people tried to help, William continues. Lord Shaftesbury fought for the 10 hours bill. Got it passed too, though owners found ways around it. Still, it was something. Started the ball rolling. This perspective is important. The Manchester you're seeing is a place of terrible hardship, but also of ongoing struggle and incremental improvement. Workers and reformers have fought for decades to win even the minimal protections that exist in 1900. As you talk with William, a commotion erupts down the street. A group of men surround someone on the ground. William shakes his head. Saturday night. Payday for some. Someone got rolled for their wages, I expect. The casualness with which he views this violence speaks volumes about its normality. In a community where everyone lives on the edge, those who fall into addiction or desperation often prey on others barely more fortunate than themselves. It's a cruel mathematics where taking from others seems the only way to survive. The police rarely bother with crimes in these neighbourhoods unless they threaten to spill into more respectable areas. Justice, like everything else in Manchester, operates differently depending on one's social position. As the night deepens, you find yourself reflecting on all you've witnessed in Manchester so far, the systemic exploitation that keeps wages barely at subsistence level while generating enormous wealth, the environmental devastation that makes every breath an assault on the lungs. The absence of effective social supports that turns any misfortune into potential catastrophe. Yet alongside these harsh realities, you've also seen remarkable resilience and solidarity, people sharing their meagre resources, communities developing mutual aid systems, workers organising to demand better conditions, charitable organisations attempting to fill the gaps left by government indifference. Manchester in 1900 contains multitudes. It's a place of terrible suffering, but also of endurance and resistance, a place where the worst excesses of industrial capitalism play out in human lives, but also where the seeds of change are being planted. As you seek shelter for another night in the city, these contradictions follow you. Tomorrow will bring new insights into the complex ecosystem of industrial poverty, the structures that create and maintain it, but also the forces working to transform it. The factories continue their relentless operation through the night, their machinery never fully silent. Manchester, the workshop of the world, does not rest. And neither do the struggles of those whose labour powers its endless production. Morning arrives with the sound of women's boots on cobblestones, hundreds of them walking in the pre-dawn darkness toward the factories and workshops that will claim their next 12 hours. You join this river of women, young and old, moving through Manchester's foggy streets like a silent army. The women don't talk much as they walk. They save their energy for the work ahead. Many carry small bundles, their midday meals of bread and perhaps a bit of cheese. Some carry infants who will spend the day in makeshift nurseries near the factories, tended by elderly women or young girls, not yet old enough for full-time work. You fall into step beside a woman in her 30s, her face already lined from years of labour. Her hands tell her story, fingers stained dark with tobacco from cigar rolling. "First day?" she asks, assuming you're a new worker, just trying to understand how people live here. You reply honestly. She gives a tired laugh. "Live? That's a generous word for what we do." Her name is Eliza, and she's been rolling cigars for 15 years, since she was 13. She's one of the more fortunate women workers in Manchester, earning nearly 18 shillings a week as a skilled roller, but the work is taking its toll on her health. "Tobacco dust gets in your lungs," she explains, coughing slightly as if to demonstrate. "Most of us don't make it past 45, but the pay's better than most women's work. Got 3 little ones to feed, haven't I?" You ask about the drinking that's supposedly common among cigar makers. "True enough," she admits. "Some girls start as young as 14. Nothing else dulls the headaches from the tobacco. Management knows it too, practically encourages it. Keeps us coming back, doesn't it? Need the wages to pay for the gin, need the gin to keep doing the work." You've arrived at a large brick building with small, grimy windows. A sign identifies it as Wilson and Matthews Fine Tobacco Products. Women stream through the entrance, punching time cards as they enter. A supervisor watches with hawkish attention, calling out to anyone who's even seconds late. "Dock your pay, they will," Eliza mutters. 2 minutes late? That's a penny off your wages, and they wonder why we drink. She disappears into the building, joining the hundreds of women who will spend their day rolling tobacco leaves into cigars and cigarettes. The air inside is thick with dust that coats the lungs and eventually kills, but the wages are relatively good. During apprenticeship, girls earn 5 to 12 shillings a week. Skilled workers like Eliza can make 17 to 20 shillings when working full-time. That's actually remarkable compared to other women's trades. You remember the details from the transcript about women's wages. Apron makers earn 6p a dozen, expected to make 48 aprons a day for a weekly wage of 7 or 8 shillings, minus the costs of thread, light, and renting a sewing machine at 1 shilling 6p. Makers of underclothing average 5 to 9 shillings a week. The Song of the Shirt, that poem about a seamstress in wretched conditions, truly is sung nightly in hundreds of garrets and cellar kitchens throughout Manchester and Salford, as the transcript says, and always to the same doleful tune, 8 or 9 shillings a week, never more than 12. You continue your exploration, heading toward a district where many tailoresses and seamstresses live and work. The buildings here are slightly better than in Angel Meadow, but not by much. Many of the women work from home, turning their small lodgings into workshops where they sew for piece rates. In one such home workshop, you meet Anne, who makes buttonholes for a tailor's shop. The room is small but neat, with a single window providing barely enough light for the detailed work. Anne sits at a small table, her fingers moving with practiced precision as she creates perfect buttonholes in waistcoats. 7 shillings a week, she says when you ask about her earnings. That's if I'm quick with my fingers. The master says that's good money for buttonholes. 7 shillings for a week's labour, hunched over in poor light, straining her eyes on fine stitching, and she considers herself fortunate because the work is regular. Got my sister and her 2 little ones living with me, Anne explains. She does washing when she can get it, but the little ones are too young for work yet. Between us, we bring in maybe 12 shillings in a good week, rent's 5 and 6. The The mathematics is brutal. 5 shillings and sixpence for rent leaves just over 6 shillings for everything else. Food, coal, clothing, light, soap, and that's in a good week when both women find steady work. How do you manage, you ask, genuinely curious about the economics of survival on such margins? Anne's face shows a flicker of pride. We're clever, aren't we? Got a system with the other women in the building. One does a big pot of stew, another bakes bread. I mend clothes for all, sharing the coal for heat when it's cold, looking after each other's little ones. Couldn't manage alone, that's certain. This is how women survive in industrial Manchester, through cooperative networks that stretch meagre resources further than seems possible. They create informal childcare arrangements, cooking collectives, shared purchasing groups. They pass down outgrown clothing, share information about which shops give credit, which foreman might be hiring, which charities offer help without humiliation. As if reading your thoughts, Anne adds, "Men have their unions now, don't they? We women have always had our own ways of standing together, less official-like, but just as important." She shows you a small book where she tracks the household accounts, every penny accounted for, every expense justified. There's no room for error when the margins are this thin. A single miscalculation could mean going hungry or falling behind on rent. "The worst thing is getting sick," she says, her voice dropping slightly. "No work means no pay means no food, no rent. Miss 2 weeks' rent, you're out. Simple as that. This precarity shapes every decision, every interaction. It creates a constant background anxiety that never fully subsides. Even in moments of relative security, the spectre of destitution looms just one misfortune away." You thank Anne for her insights and continue your exploration. Your next stop is a laundry where women wash the clothes of the middle and upper classes, some of the hardest physical labour available to women in Victorian Manchester. The laundry is a scene from hell, a cavernous room filled with steam and the caustic smell of lye soap. Women stand at huge tubs of scalding water, their arms raw and red to the elbows, their faces streaming with sweat despite the February chill outside. The physical toll is visible in their bodies, shoulders permanently hunched, hands swollen and cracked, variegated veins prominent on their legs from constant standing. The forewoman, Mrs. Bates, explains the operation with business-like efficiency. 50 women working here, pay is daily, 2 shillings for a full day, sun up to sundown. No work if the weather's too wet for drying, no pay if you're slow. 2 shillings for perhaps 14 hours of punishing physical labour, with no guarantee of regular work. And these women are the fortunate ones who found employment with a large laundry rather than trying to compete as independent washerwomen. You ask Mrs. Bates about the women who work here, mostly widows, deserted wives, or women with useless husbands, she says bluntly. Some girls who need to support parents or siblings. Few options for respectable work if you're not trained for a trade, aren't there? It's this, the factories, or selling yourself. Many have tried all three. The casual reference to prostitution as simply another employment option reminds you of the limited choices available to women in economic distress. In Manchester, as in most Victorian cities, a significant number of women turn to prostitution either full-time or as occasional supplementary income when other work is scarce. You leave the steam-filled laundry and head toward the market area, where women engage in various forms of street trade, selling matches, flowers, second-hand items, or food from small stalls. These enterprises require minimal capital to start and offer flexibility that factory work doesn't, making them popular with mothers of young children. At one small stall, an older woman sells hot potatoes, baked in a portable oven and sold to workers who have no facilities to cook their own meals. Her name is Martha, and she's been running this stall for 20 years. Started when my husband died in 80, she explains, deftly wrapping a hot potato in paper for a customer. Factory accident. No compensation then. Different now, but not by much. Had 5 little ones to feed somehow. Her potato business barely provides subsistence, but it's allowed her independence and the ability to look after her family. All 5 children survived to adulthood, a significant achievement in itself in working-class Manchester, where child mortality remains appallingly high. My girls are all in service now, Martha says with pride. Better than the mills or the laundry, isn't it? Regular meals, warm place to sleep. My boys took factory work, but the youngest is learning bookkeeping at night school. Might get a clerk position if he's lucky. This intergenerational advancement strategy is common among women like Martha, sacrificing everything to give their children slightly better opportunities, hoping each generation can climb one small step up the economic ladder. As evening approaches, you make your way to an area where a different kind of women's work takes place. After dark, certain streets become the territory of prostitutes, women who've either chosen this work over starvation wages in factories or been driven to it by circumstances beyond their control. On one such corner, you meet Elizabeth, who speaks with surprising frankness about her situation. Was in the cotton mills for 10 years, she tells you. Got the cough so bad I couldn't keep up with the machines. No work for sick women, is there? This pays better anyway when it's not dangerous. The dangers are considerable. Violence from clients and police, disease, pregnancy, social ostracism. But for some women, the economic calculation makes sense when compared to the slow death of factory work at subsistence wages. Some only do it when they're desperate, Elizabeth explains. Factory girl whose husband's out of work, widows with children, young ones fresh from the countryside with no skills. Most don't last, end up dead, in jail, or in the workhouse. The workhouse, that spectre that haunts all the poor of Manchester. For women, it holds particular horrors, as families are separated and the stigma follows them even after release, making it harder to find legitimate work or lodgings. Rather die on the streets than go there, Elizabeth says flatly. They take your dignity before anything else, nothing left of you when they're done. Night is falling fully now, and you leave Elizabeth to her work. The contrast between her matter-of-fact attitude toward her profession and society's moral condemnation of women like her is striking. The same society that creates economic conditions where women must choose between starvation and prostitution, then punishes them for making the only choice that ensures survival. You return to the residential areas where women's work continues long after factory shifts end. In small lodgings throughout Manchester, women cook, clean, mend, nurse, and care for children after already completing exhausting paid labour. This second shift goes unrecognised and unpaid, but is essential to family survival. In one such home, you meet Margaret, who has just returned from her job at a textile mill. Though clearly exhausted, she immediately begins preparing a meal for her 4 children, while her husband sits by the small fire, nursing a pint from the local pub. Jim's back's bad again, she explains, not quite apologetically, but with the air of someone used to making excuses. Can't do the heavy work at the docks anymore, picks up odd jobs when he can. The reality in many working-class homes is that women bear the double burden of wage earning and domestic responsibilities. Even when men are present and employed, most household management falls to women, stretching inadequate wages to cover necessities, making decisions about which bills to pay and which to defer, which child gets new shoes and which must wait. Margaret's dinner preparation is a masterclass in resourcefulness. Potato peelings become soup stock, stale bread is revived with a sprinkle of water before toasting, a single onion flavours a pot that must feed 6 people. Nothing is wasted, everything serves multiple purposes. "We'll manage," she says with quiet determination when you express concern about her family's situation. "Always have, haven't we?" This simple statement perhaps best captures the essence of women's experience in industrial Manchester. They manage somehow against odds that seem insurmountable. They create sustenance from scraps, community from shared hardship, meaning from endless labour. As you leave Margaret's home, you reflect on all the women you've met today, the cigar maker, the buttonhole specialist, the laundresses, the street vendor, the prostitute, the mother juggling factory work and family care. Each represents a different strategy for survival within a system designed to extract maximum labour for minimum compensation. Their wages are systematically lower than men's, not because their work is less valuable, but because their economic vulnerability makes them easier to exploit. A skilled tailor's machinist makes 11 to 14 shillings weekly for work that would earn a man at least double. An apron maker earns 6 pence per dozen items that will be sold for many times that amount. Yet within these constraints, women have created networks of mutual support that make survival possible. They share childcare, food, heat, information, and emotional support. They develop complex economic strategies involving credit, bartering, collective purchasing, and resource pooling. They prioritize their children's advancement over their own comfort. As darkness settles over Manchester, these networks continue their invisible operation, women moving between homes to check on elderly neighbours, sharing leftover food, minding children so others can take evening work, teaching young girls the survival skills they'll need all too soon. The factories may drive Manchester's formal economy, but women's unpaid labour and mutual aid create the conditions that make industrial capitalism possible, reproducing the workforce, maintaining households, stretching wages that were never intended to support families, and absorbing the shocks of economic fluctuation. Tomorrow you'll explore other aspects of Manchester life, but tonight you carry with you a deeper understanding of how women navigate this industrial landscape, not as passive victims, but as active strategists in the daily battle for survival. Dawn brings a chorus of coughing across Manchester's slums. The sound echoes from open windows and thin walls, deep, wet, rattling coughs that speak of damaged lungs and chronic illness. It's the soundtrack of industrial life, as much a part of the city as the factory whistles and clanging machinery. You wake to this symphony of sickness, your own chest tight from just a few days of breathing Manchester's air. It makes you think about your clean bedroom back home, where the air doesn't taste of coal and chemicals. The people here never get that respite. Their lungs are under constant assault from the moment of birth. Today, you're determined to understand the physical toll of Manchester life, the diseases, the medical care, or lack thereof, and how people cope with illness when stopping work means starvation. Your guide for the day is Dr. Harrison, a young physician who works at a charitable dispensary in Ancoats. You meet him as he begins his morning rounds, medical bag in hand, already looking exhausted though the day has barely begun. "Been up all night with a diphtheria case," he explains, stifling a yawn. "Little girl, 5 years old, didn't make it. Third one this month in the same building." Diphtheria is just one of the many infectious diseases that ravage Manchester's poor districts. Typhoid, cholera, tuberculosis, scarlet fever, smallpox all find perfect breeding conditions in the overcrowded, unsanitary lodgings where families are packed together without adequate water or sewage systems. The medical challenges here are overwhelming, Dr. Harrison tells you as you walk together through morning streets already thick with smoke. It's not just treating disease, it's fighting the conditions that cause disease in the first place. Bad water, contaminated food, overcrowding, malnutrition, industrial pollution. The people here don't stand a chance. The dispensary where Dr. Harrison works provides free or low-cost medical care to those who can't afford private physicians, which is virtually everyone in this district. It's funded by charitable donations and staffed partly by medical students gaining experience. The small waiting room is already full when you arrive, though it's not yet 8 in the morning. Men with industrial injuries, women with sick children, elderly people with chronic conditions, all waiting patiently for what might be their only chance at medical attention. A young mother holds a baby who's breathing with concerning rapidity, its tiny chest heaving with effort. An old man sits with his hands trembling uncontrollably, a symptom of years working with industrial mercury. A child of about 8 has a rash covering her face and arms, oozing and angry-looking. Typical morning, Dr. Harrison says, nodding to the nurse who manages the queue. We'll see about 40 patients before noon, refer the worst cases to hospital if there are beds, and turn away as many again when we run out of time and supplies. You observe as he examines the baby first, a clear medical priority. His diagnosis is swift and grim. Bronchiolitis, common in these parts. The air, you know. Little lungs can't handle the pollution. He turns to the anxious mother. Keep her upright as much as possible. Steam in the room if you can manage it. Bring her back if the breathing gets worse or she stops feeding. The mother looks relieved to have a diagnosis, but worried about the prognosis. Will she be all right, doctor? Dr. Harrison's face shows a moment of conflict before settling on cautious optimism. Children can be remarkably resilient. Keep her warm and fed, that's the best medicine. No prescription, you notice, no miracle drugs or treatments. In 1900, medical science has few effective remedies for most conditions. Diagnosis is more advanced than treatment. For many illnesses, supportive care and hope are all that's available. As the morning progresses, you witness the catalogue of suffering that defines health in industrial Manchester. Respiratory diseases dominate, from acute bronchitis to chronic cotton lung among textile workers. Industrial accidents are common: crushed fingers, chemical burns, deep lacerations from machinery. Nutritional deficiencies manifest as rickets in children, anemia in women, deteriorating teeth and bones in all ages. One case particularly strikes you: a teenage boy with a ghostly pallor who works in the white lead factory. His hands tremble continuously, and he complains of severe abdominal pain and headaches. Lead poisoning, Dr. Harrison explains after examining him. We see it constantly in painters and factory workers. It will kill him eventually, but he can't afford to change jobs. His family depends on his wages. The boy, named Thomas, knows his diagnosis well. This isn't his first visit. Got any new tricks for the pain, Doc? He asks with forced cheerfulness. The last powders helped some. Dr. Harrison provides more pain powders, but both physician and patient know they're merely palliative. The real treatment would be removing Thomas from lead exposure, an economic impossibility for his family. After the dispensary, Dr. Harrison takes you to visit a phenomenon unique to industrial cities like Manchester: cellar dwellings. These are literally underground rooms, originally designed for storage, now rented as living spaces to the poorest families. You descend narrow stone steps into a dark, damp chamber beneath street level. The ceiling is so low you must stoop. A single small window at pavement level provides the only natural light and ventilation. The air is thick with mould and the unmistakable smell of sewage seeping through the walls. Family of 6 lives here, Dr. Harrison says grimly. Pay 2 shillings weekly for the privilege. The children all have chronic chest infections. The baby died of diarrheal disease last summer. The father has tuberculosis, works when he can, which isn't often now. The mother, Sarah, greets Dr. Harrison with weary familiarity. Her face is prematurely aged, her body bent as though carrying an invisible weight. In her arms is a toddler with the swollen belly and thin limbs of malnutrition. He's not keeping anything down, doctor, she explains, gently bouncing the listless child. 2 days now, just brings it all back up. Dr. Harrison examines the boy with gentle efficiency. Try rice water, he advises. Boiled rice, strain off the water, let him sip it slowly. Keep him warm. I'll leave these bismuth powders for the vomiting. Again, you notice how limited the medical interventions are. Dietary advice, basic comfort measures, simple remedies to address symptoms rather than causes. The real prescription would be proper housing, clean water, adequate food, all economically out of reach. After leaving the cellar dwelling, you ask Dr. Harrison about tuberculosis, the consumption that seems so prevalent in Manchester. It's everywhere, he confirms. The perfect disease for industrial slums, spreads easily in overcrowded conditions, activated by poor nutrition and physical stress, progresses rapidly in bodies already weakened by industrial labour and pollution. You remember the woman with the cough from yesterday, the one whose neighbour had tuberculosis. Her casual acceptance of probable infection reflects the fatalism many feel about health in these conditions. The tragedy, Dr. Harrison continues, is that consumption is potentially preventable. Good ventilation, proper nutrition, reduced crowding, early isolation of cases. These measures can significantly reduce transmission, but they require resources these people simply don't have. Your next stop is Manchester Royal Infirmary, one of the city's major hospitals, which accepts both paying patients and a limited number of charity cases. The contrast with the dispensary is striking. Here, the wards are relatively clean and organised, the staff more numerous, the treatments more advanced. But as Dr. Parker, one of the senior physicians, explains, hospital care remains inaccessible to most of Manchester's poor. We have 300 beds for a city of 700,000, he tells you during a tour of the facility. Priority goes to acute cases, surgical emergencies, and those with reasonable prospects of recovery. Chronic conditions, terminal cases, the elderly, they're generally managed at home or in workhouse infirmaries. The economic reality of healthcare in 1900 is brutal. Those who can afford private care receive it. Those with certain types of employment might have access to works doctors or friendly society schemes that provide basic medical coverage. The destitute might receive charity care if beds are available. Everyone else manages as best they can with home remedies, patent medicines, and untrained practitioners. Speaking of home remedies, your next visit is to Mrs. Wilson, known locally as a wise woman, someone with knowledge of traditional medicines who serves as a de facto healthcare provider for those who can't access or afford formal medical care. Her small cottage is filled with drying herbs, bottles of tinctures and jars of salves. The air smells of mint, camphor, and something sharply medicinal you can't identify. Mrs. Wilson herself is older, with keen eyes and hands gnarled by arthritis, but still deft as she mixes powders at a small table. Most folks come to me first, she explains, or when the doctors can't help them. I don't charge what I can't be paid. Maybe some eggs, bit of mending, whatever they can manage. Her remedies range from genuinely effective herbal treatments to completely useless concoctions, with many falling somewhere in between. Willow bark tea for pain and fever, a natural source of salicylic acid similar to aspirin. Honey and lemon for coughs. Poultices of bread and milk for infections. Chamomile for digestive complaints. The doctors have their place, Mrs. Wilson says without rancour, but they're not always right, are they? And they can't be everywhere. People need someone who knows them, knows their families, understands their lives. There's truth in what she says. The formal medical system, limited as it is, can't possibly serve all of Manchester's poor. Informal practitioners like Mrs. Wilson fill critical gaps, providing care that combines practical experience, traditional knowledge, and community understanding. As afternoon approaches, you visit one of the most dreaded medical institutions in Manchester, a workhouse infirmary. This is where the destitute sick end up if they have nowhere else to go and no one to care for them. The building itself resembles a prison more than a hospital. Inside, long wards are filled with the aging poor, the chronically ill, those with mental disturbances, and those simply too weak from malnutrition and exhaustion to work anymore. The smell is overpowering. Unwashed bodies, untreated wounds, human waste and disinfectant combined into a miasma that makes your eyes water. The matron who shows you around makes no attempt to sugarcoat conditions. We have one nurse for 60 patients, most of whom need significant care. The doctor visits twice weekly. We do what we can with what we have, which isn't much. The patients lie in narrow beds, many staring vacantly at the ceiling. Some moan or call out, others lie ominously still. You notice how many are elderly, worn-out workers whose bodies gave out after decades in the factories and mills. This is what awaits most of Manchester's working class, the matron says matter-of-factly. Work until you can't, then end up here if your family can't support you, or if you have no family left. You recall the incident mentioned in the transcript, the pauper lunatic who was beaten to death by an attendant at Kumpol Workhouse, a case so shocking it prompted a special order from the Home Secretary. Abuses are common in these institutions, where the most vulnerable are housed with minimal oversight and resources. Leaving the workhouse infirmary, you feel a pressing need for fresh air. Though fresh is relative in Manchester, you head toward one of the city's parks, small green spaces that provide minimal respite from the industrial landscape. Along the way, you encounter a street vendor selling patent medicines from a small cart. These commercially produced remedies, often containing alcohol, opiates, or other addictive substances, are the self-medication option for many who can't access proper medical care. Cural tonic, the vendor calls out. Restores vitality, cleanses the blood, cures consumption, nervous debility, female complaints, only £1 a bottle. People stop to purchase these dubious remedies, desperate for something, anything, that might alleviate their suffering. Some patent medicines contain ingredients with genuine pharmacological effects, often dangerous ones. Others are completely useless but exploit the placebo effect, all profit from desperation. In the small park, you notice children playing despite the cold February air. Their games are energetic, but many show visible signs of poor health. The bowlegs of rickets, the pale complexions of anemia, the too thin frames of chronic malnutrition. They cough frequently, a reminder that even in this relatively open space, Manchester's polluted air follows them. A woman watching the children tells you she brings her son here daily for his chest. She believes the marginally cleaner air helps his chronic bronchitis. It's a small, probably ineffective intervention, but it represents the limited health measures available to mothers who can't afford to move their families to healthier environments. As evening falls, you return to Ancoats to witness one more aspect of healthcare in Manchester, home nursing. In a small 2-room lodging, a woman named Grace is caring for her husband who has miner's phthisis, silicosis from years working in coal mines before coming to Manchester. James lies in bed, his breathing laboured and wheezing. Every breath is a struggle, his chest heaving with the effort. He can no longer work, so Grace supports the family by taking in washing and sewing, work she does in the same small room where her husband slowly dies. "The doctor says he needs mountain air," she says with bitter irony. "Suggested we move to Switzerland, might as well have suggested the moon." James receives a small pension from a friendly society he contributed to while working, 5 shillings weekly, barely enough for rent. They survive on Grace's earnings and their children's wages. Their daughter works at a textile mill, their son as a delivery boy. Both contribute their entire pay to the family economy. This arrangement is typical for families facing chronic illness. When a breadwinner becomes unable to work, everyone else works harder. Children enter employment earlier than planned. Women take on multiple jobs. Extended family may help if they can. The social safety net consists entirely of mutual aid, charity, and exploitation of every possible labour source within the family. Grace shows you her daily nursing routine, turning James to prevent bed sores, preparing special broths when he can eat, administering the laudanum drops that provide his only relief from pain and air hunger. She does all this while still completing her paid work, maintaining their home and supporting her children. "You just manage, don't you?" she says when you express admiration for her resilience. "No choice in it. Don't eat, don't pay rent, end up in the workhouse. Simple as that." As night falls across Manchester, countless similar scenes play out in lodgings throughout the city. The ill are cared for by family members who themselves are often sick or exhausted. Home remedies are administered alongside whatever medical advice could be obtained. The dying are comforted as best as possible in circumstances that offer little dignity or relief. Dr. Harrison finds you outside Grace's building, having completed his evening rounds, another 12-hour day of fighting unwinnable battles against the health consequences of industrial poverty. "The real disease is the system itself," he says, looking up at the darkening sky, where factory smoke merges with the evening fog. "We treat symptoms while the cause remains untouched. All the medicine in the world can't cure what Manchester does to these people." His words stay with you as you make your way through streets now quiet except for the occasional cough echoing from open windows. The physical suffering you've witnessed today represents just one dimension of the cost of industrial capitalism. Bodies broken as surely as if by deliberate design, lives shortened by decades compared to the middle and upper classes. Yet even in this landscape of illness and premature death, you've also seen remarkable resilience, people caring for each other despite their own suffering, community networks that support the sick when formal systems fail them, small acts of mercy and kindness in circumstances that should extinguish both. Tomorrow will bring new insights into other aspects of Manchester life, but tonight you carry with you a deeper understanding of the physical toll of industrialisation, how it literally gets under the skin and into the lungs of those who power it, how it reshapes bodies as surely as it reshapes landscapes, how it creates patterns of disease as distinctive as the products its factories produce. And perhaps most importantly, how people continue to fight for health and dignity even when the odds are overwhelmingly stacked against them. Morning in Manchester begins differently depending on where you wake up. In the working class districts, it arrives with factory whistles, coughing fits, and the tramping of thousands of feet heading toward another day of labour. In the wealthy districts, it comes with the gentle knock of servants, hot breakfast served on fine china, and the rustle of newspaper pages reporting on business and empire. Today you decide to explore this contrast, to understand how Manchester's wealthy elite live in relation to the working poor who generate their fortunes. You begin in Victoria Park, one of the exclusive residential enclaves where factory owners, merchants and professionals have built their mansions. The first thing you notice is the air. It's still Manchester air, but remarkably clearer than in Angel Meadow or Ancoats. This is by design. The wealthy built their homes upwind of the factories, ensuring that the smoke and effluvia flow away from, not toward, their residences. Geography becomes a physical manifestation of class division, clean air for those who can afford it, pollution for those who cannot. The houses themselves are impressive, large Victorian villas set back from tree-lined streets surrounded by gardens and decorative iron fences. Servants move purposefully between houses and shops, conducting the daily business that maintains these comfortable lives. Carriages come and go, their well-groomed horses a stark contrast to the skeletal nags that pull carts in the poorer districts. Outside one particularly grand residence, you notice a man preparing to leave for the day, clearly the master of the house. His clothing is impeccable, his bearing confident. A servant holds the carriage door as he enters, then hands him a newspaper and what appears to be a business ledger. You follow at a discreet distance as the carriage heads toward the commercial district. This is your opportunity to witness how the other half of Manchester lives, or more accurately, how the top 5% lives, since true wealth is concentrated in remarkably few hands. The carriage stops outside a grand building in the heart of Manchester's business district. The sign identifies it as the headquarters of Drummond & Sons Cotton Exporters. This, then, is a cotton merchant, one of the key players in the industry that gives Manchester its nickname of Cottonopolis. You continue your exploration of the commercial and civic centre of Manchester. The architecture here tells its own story of wealth and power, imposing stone buildings with classical facades designed to project permanence and authority, banks, insurance companies, commodity exchanges, government offices, the infrastructure of commerce and control. The contrast with the slums you visited is jarring. Here, the streets are wider, cleaner, better maintained. Police officers patrol regularly, ensuring that the undesirable elements of Manchester life remain safely distant from the centres of wealth. Even the people look different, healthier, better dressed, moving with the confidence that comes from security rather than the wariness born of constant vulnerability. This is the Manchester that visitors see and admire, the Manchester of grand municipal buildings, cultural institutions and commercial might. The Manchester that Friedrich Engels called hell upon earth remains carefully hidden from view, an inconvenient reality behind the impressive facade. You pause outside the Manchester Royal Exchange, where cotton traders and manufacturers conduct their business. Through the windows you can see well-dressed men engaged in animated conversation, making deals that will determine the fates of thousands of workers they will never meet. A gentleman emerges from the exchange, lighting a cigar as he descends the steps. He looks prosperous, but not ostentatiously wealthy. A middle-rank businessman, perhaps. You decide to strike up a conversation, introducing yourself as a visitor interested in Manchester's industries. His name is Wilson, and he owns a medium-sized textile mill employing about 200 workers. He's happy to talk about business conditions, the wars affecting trade, the competition from other manufacturing centres, the challenges of maintaining profitability. Labour costs are the key, he explains, puffing on his cigar. Keep those under control, and you can weather most market fluctuations. Let them rise and you're finished. When you ask about working conditions in his factory, his expression shifts slightly. Decent enough, he says defensively. Better than many. We've installed the required safety guards on most machines. Maintain reasonable hours, 10 hours daily except during rush orders. Don't employ children under 9. More than fair, considering. His definition of fair is revealing. The bare minimum legal requirements are presented as generous concessions. The exploitation that underpins his prosperity is invisible to him, or at least unacknowledged. These union agitators cause nothing but trouble, he continues, warming to his theme. Workers don't understand business realities. They think money appears by magic, don't see the risks we take, the competition we face. If they had their way, we'd all be bankrupt, and then where would they be? This perspective, that workers should be grateful for any employment regardless of conditions or compensation, is common among Manchester's business class. The systemic exploitation is reframed as economic necessity or even benevolence. Wilson invites you to visit his club for lunch, one of the exclusive gentlemen's establishments where Manchester's business elite socialise, network, and make the connections that maintain their position. Inside, the atmosphere is one of quiet luxury, polished wood, leather chairs, attentive servants, and the murmur of cultured voices discussing politics, business, and empire. The lunch itself would feed a working family for days, multiple courses served on fine china, accompanied by wine and followed by port and cigars. The conversation ranges widely, but never touches on the conditions of the workers who make this lifestyle possible. They are as invisible here as the servants who silently refill glasses and remove plates. After lunch, Wilson introduces you to several associates, a factory owner, a banker, a shipping magnate. Their conversation provides insights into how the elite view Manchester's social problems. Charity is essential, of course, says the banker, Hammond. We all contribute generously to various causes, but one must be careful not to encourage dependence. Too much assistance undermines the work ethic. The Wesleyan mission does excellent work, adds Wilson. Practical help for those willing to help themselves. That's the key, distinguishing between the deserving and undeserving poor. This distinction is central to Victorian charity. The deserving poor are those whose poverty results from misfortune despite their moral virtue and work ethic. The undeserving are those deemed responsible for their own poverty through moral failings like drinking, gambling, or simple laziness. This framework allows the wealthy to provide limited assistance while maintaining the fundamental inequalities of the system. The workers' own habits are their worst enemy, says Jackson, the factory owner. Drinking, gambling, improvidence. Give them higher wages and they just waste it. Better to keep them on tight margins. Encourages discipline. You think of the people you've met in Angel Meadow and Ancoats, their desperate calculations to stretch inadequate wages, their mutual support networks, their exhausting labour. How different from this comfortable assessment of their character flaws as the cause of their poverty. As the afternoon progresses, you excuse yourself from the club and head toward another part of prosperous Manchester, the philanthropic institutions established by wealthy donors to address social problems. The Manchester Free Library is one such institution, a grand building providing access to books and newspapers for those who could never afford to purchase them. Inside, working men in their best clothes, still threadbare by middle-class standards, read quietly, taking advantage of one of the few free resources available to them. The library's benefactor, a wealthy industrialist named Sir Joseph Whitworth, has his portrait prominently displayed in the entrance hall. Like many of Manchester's elite, he has chosen to direct some of his fortune toward charitable endeavours, creating institutions that might alleviate some symptoms of poverty while leaving its structural causes untouched. Next, you visit one of Manchester's charitable hospitals, where the wealthy serve on boards of governors and make donations that fund care for the poor, though never enough to meet the overwhelming need. The lady patronesses are making their rounds, wealthy women who volunteer their time supervising wards and distributing small comforts to patients. One such patroness, Lady Drummond, wife of the cotton merchant whose office you saw earlier, explains her involvement. One must do one's Christian duty, mustn't one? These poor creatures need our guidance as much as our charity. We try to instill proper habits and moral values alongside physical healing. This combination of material assistance and moral instruction characterizes much Victorian philanthropy. Help comes with expectations of gratitude, deference, and conformity to middle-class behavioral standards. The power relationship remains firmly intact. As evening approaches, you attend a meeting of the Manchester Statistical Society, an organisation of businessmen, academics and reformers who gather data on social conditions and debate potential improvements. Tonight's topic is housing conditions in the poorest districts. The presenter, Professor Ackroyd, displays charts showing the correlation between overcrowding and disease rates. His language is technical, academic. The human suffering represented by his statistics is abstracted into data points and trend lines. Still, the information is compelling and appears to genuinely disturb some audience members who may never have visited the areas under discussion. During the subsequent debate, you observe the range of elite opinions about Manchester's social problems. Some argue for purely private, charitable solutions. Others advocate limited government intervention through building regulations or public health measures. A few more radical voices suggest that the entire economic system might require restructuring. One such voice belongs to a young factory owner named Robert Phillips. "Gentlemen," he says, rising to address the room, "we cannot continue as we are. The conditions in Angel Meadow and similar districts are not merely unfortunate, they are immoral, and increasingly, they are dangerous to all of us." Murmurs of disagreement ripple through the audience, but Phillips continues, "We pride ourselves on Manchester's prosperity, while thousands live in conditions we wouldn't tolerate for our horses. This level of inequality is not sustainable. If we do not address it voluntarily through meaningful reforms, it will eventually be addressed for us through social unrest or worse." This perspective, that extreme inequality might threaten the stability of the entire system, represents a growing awareness among some of the more thoughtful members of Manchester's elite. Self-interest, if not moral concern, might eventually compel changes to the industrial order. After the meeting, you speak briefly with Phillips. Unlike many of his peers, he has actually visited the slums himself rather than relying on reports and statistics. This direct experience has clearly affected him deeply. "I inherited my factory from my father," he explains. "Never questioned the system until I saw where my workers lived. Now I can't unsee it. We're trying some experiments. Higher wages, better housing, profit-sharing schemes. My fellow manufacturers think I'm mad, but productivity is up. Turnover is down. It may be that treating workers as humans is good business as well as good ethics." Phillips represents a minority viewpoint, but perhaps a harbinger of changes to come. As Manchester enters the 20th century, the extremes of Victorian capitalism are increasingly questioned from both outside and, occasionally, within the elite. As night falls, you make your way back toward the working-class districts. The transition is both gradual and stark. Streets become narrower and dirtier, buildings more decrepit, faces more worn. Police presence diminishes, the infrastructure of comfort and control recedes. This spatial segregation is no accident. Manchester is designed to keep its different social classes separate, allowing the wealthy to remain largely insulated from the consequences of the system that benefits them. They can visit the slums as charitable patrons or social investigators, but they return each night to districts where such conditions are literally unimaginable. You pass a group of well-dressed young men emerging from a cab, slumming adventurers from the wealthy districts out for an evening's entertainment in the notorious pubs of Angel Meadow. For them, the poverty and desperation are exotic attractions to be briefly sampled before returning to safety and comfort. Near the boundary between commercial and working-class Manchester, you notice a substantial building with light still showing in the upper windows despite the late hour. A sign identifies it as the offices of the Manchester Guardian newspaper. Inside, journalists and editors are preparing tomorrow's edition. Among them is a man clearly working on a special investigation, his desk covered with notes and his face showing the strain of someone grappling with difficult truths. This, you learn, is a colleague of Robert Sherard, another journalist documenting conditions in Manchester's poorest districts. Like Sherard, he has spent time undercover, living in common lodging houses, eating the food of the poor, talking directly with those who suffer most under the industrial system. The hardest part, he tells you when you introduce yourself and express interest in his work, is getting people to care. The facts have been available for decades. Engels wrote about these conditions in the 1840s. Government reports have documented them, journalists have exposed them, and yet they persist. He shuffles through his notes, interviews with workers, descriptions of housing conditions, statistics on wages and prices. The comfortable classes don't want to know, he continues. It disrupts their sense of Manchester as a triumph of progress and industry. Easier to blame the poor for their own suffering than to question the system that creates both extreme wealth and extreme poverty. His work, like Sherard's, represents another approach to bridging Manchester's divided worlds, using journalism to make the invisible visible, to force the comfortable to confront the realities they prefer to ignore. As you finally return to the lodging house where you've been staying, you reflect on the city's stark contrasts. Manchester contains multiple realities that barely intersect. The Manchester of grand commercial buildings and comfortable suburbs, the Manchester of respectable working-class neighbourhoods struggling for stability, the Manchester of desperate poverty in places like Angel Meadow. These separate Manchesters exist in relation to each other, the wealth of one built directly on the exploited labour of another, yet the connections remain largely unacknowledged by those who benefit most from the arrangement. Still, you've also seen signs of potential change. Journalists exposing conditions, reformers gathering data, the occasional industrialist questioning the status quo, workers organising to demand better treatment. Manchester in 1900 stands at a crossroads, with the worst excesses of Victorian capitalism increasingly challenged, but still firmly in place. Tomorrow will bring your final day of exploration in this complex, terrible, fascinating city, a chance to understand how all these elements interact and what they might tell us about where industrial society is heading. But for tonight, you return to the uncomfortable realities of a lodging housebed, still processing the stark divisions that define life in the workshop of the world. Dawn on your final day in Manchester brings a rare meteorological event, actual sunshine breaking through the perpetual haze of smoke and fog. The light reveals the city in a different aspect, the red brick buildings momentarily glowing with unexpected warmth, the grime and decay temporarily gilded. You take it as an invitation to reflect on what you've witnessed over these past days. The hardship, yes, but also the resilience, the community, the ways people create meaning and even find joy in the harshest circumstances. Today, you want to understand not just how people survive in Manchester, but how they live, how they mark the passages of life from birth to death, how they celebrate, mourn, love, and dream in the shadow of the smokestacks. Your guide for this final exploration is Martha, the potato seller you met earlier. At 65, she's lived through nearly the entire Victorian era in Manchester and has witnessed the city's transformation from a relatively small town to the industrial colossus it is in 1900. Born here when Victoria was just a girl herself, she tells you as you walk together through streets now bustling with morning activity. Seen it all, haven't I? Good times, bad times, mostly bad for folk like us, but we made our own good when we could. Martha's first stop is a momentous family occasion. Her youngest granddaughter is getting married today. The celebration will be modest by middle-class standards, but represents a significant investment for a working-class family. The location is St. Michael's Church, a simple stone building serving one of Manchester's poorer parishes. Penny weddings, they used to call them, Martha explains. Everyone puts in what they can. Food, drink, music. Community makes it special, not money. Inside the church, the wedding party is gathering. The bride, Mary, wears a dress that's been carefully altered from her mother's, which was itself passed down from an older sister. She carries flowers from the small garden her father tends behind their lodgings, cultivated in polluted soil, but blooming defiantly nonetheless. The groom, William, works in one of the textile mills. He saved for 3 years to afford this day and the small room they'll rent afterward. His face shows the strain of industrial labour. He's only 22, but could pass for 30. Yet today, it's transformed by nervous joy. Family members arrive in their best clothes, outfits carefully preserved for special occasions, mended and altered over years of use. Many show signs of the physical toll exacted by industrial work. Men with missing fingers from machinery accidents, women with the curved spines of those who've spent decades bent over sewing machines, children already developing the hollow chests of incipient respiratory disease. Yet the mood is genuinely celebratory. These moments of community ritual provide essential counterpoints to the grinding reality of daily survival. They affirm connections, create memories, mark the passages that give shape and meaning to lives often defined by relentless labour. The ceremony itself is brief but moving. The young couple exchange vows with quiet sincerity. The parish priest, Father Collins, knows the family well and speaks to their specific strengths and challenges rather than reciting generic platitudes. Marriage in Manchester is an act of courage, he tells the couple. Every day will test your commitment, but what you build together will be stronger for having weathered these tests. After the ceremony comes the celebration, held in the church hall because no one's home is large enough to accommodate the extended family and neighbours who participate. Tables are laden with food contributed by everyone attending: meat pies, sausages, bread, cheese, vegetables from small garden plots, homemade beer and cider. Musicians appear. An uncle with a fiddle, a cousin with a penny whistle, a neighbour with a battered accordion. The music they play connects these industrial workers to rural traditions many of their families left behind when they came to Manchester for factory work. As people eat, drink, and eventually dance, you notice how physical hardship temporarily recedes. Bodies bent by labour straighten in dance, faces lined with exhaustion brighten with laughter. The weight of Manchester life is briefly but significantly lightened. Best part of being poor is knowing who your true family is, Martha says, watching the celebration with evident satisfaction. Rich folk, they've got their servants and their social circles, but it's all for show, isn't it? When times are hard, who stands by them? We've got nothing but each other, but that's everything when it matters. This observation captures something essential about community in Manchester's working-class districts. The mutual support networks aren't just economic survival strategies. They're the foundation of emotional and social resilience. They provide context and meaning that transcends the harshness of material conditions. After the wedding celebration begins in earnest, Martha takes you to witness another life passage, this one more sombre. In a small house in Ancoats, a neighbourhood child has died of diphtheria. The family is holding a wake, another community ritual that serves multiple purposes. The child, a girl named Emma, lies in a small coffin in the family's main room. She's been dressed in her best clothes with flowers placed around her. Neighbours and family have gathered to support the parents and siblings, bringing food and drink, sharing memories, helping with practical arrangements. The mother, Sarah, greets visitors with the stunned composure of someone moving through overwhelming grief. This isn't her first child lost to disease. 2 others died in infancy, but each loss carries its unique anguish. Emma loved singing, she tells visitors. Had the voice of an angel, used to make up songs about everything. The birds, the rain, her little brother, even the factory whistle. The father, John, stands more quietly at the edge of the room. His face shows the particular devastation of a working-class father, the man who labours endlessly to provide, yet couldn't protect his child from the environment that simultaneously employs and kills him and his family. Child mortality remains appallingly high in Manchester's poorest districts. Infectious diseases spread rapidly through overcrowded housing. Industrial pollution weakens young lungs. Malnutrition compromises immune systems. Yet each death is experienced not as a statistic, but as a searing personal loss. What strikes you most about the wake, however, is how the community transforms individual grief into collective care. Women take over household tasks, allowing the mother time to mourn. Men contribute to funeral expenses, which would otherwise consume a family's entire savings. Children include the deceased siblings in games and activities, providing distraction from the immediate loss. "We bury too many," Martha says quietly as you leave, "but never alone. That's something, at least." From the wake, you move to another aspect of Manchester life, leisure. Despite working weeks of 60 hours or more, people still create time and space for recreation, entertainment, and pleasure. Martha takes you to a local pub where a Sunday singing competition is underway. The pub is crowded but not rowdy. Working men and women have gathered to perform and listen to songs ranging from traditional ballads to music hall numbers to operatic arias. The quality varies widely, but the audience is both enthusiastic and critically discerning. "Manchester's always been musical," Martha explains. "Factory work is noisy, repetitive. Maybe that's why people value music so much. Reminds us we're human, not machines." A young woman takes her turn, singing a haunting folk song about lost rural homes, a theme that resonates deeply with many whose families came to Manchester from the countryside. Her voice fills the small space, momentarily transforming it from a grimy urban pub to somewhere timeless and transcendent. When she finishes, the applause is genuine and prolonged. For a few minutes, everyone in the room has shared something beautiful amid surroundings that offer precious little beauty. The communal experience creates a brief but real sense of elevation above circumstance. This pattern, finding moments of transcendence within harsh reality, appears in various forms across Manchester. Martha shows you other examples throughout the afternoon: amateur dramatic societies performing in church halls, reading groups discussing literature in back rooms of pubs, choral societies rehearsing complex pieces in school buildings after hours. "People think we're just work and sleep and survival," Martha says, "but that's never been true. We've always made art, made music, told stories, different from fancy folk with their theatres and concert halls, but no less meaningful." As evening approaches, Martha takes you to her own small lodging for tea, a gesture of hospitality that represents significant sacrifice given her limited resources. Her room is tiny but meticulously maintained, with small touches that transform institutional space into personal home. A hand-crocheted doily on the table, a cheaply framed photograph of her late husband, a windowsill plant straining toward what little sunlight penetrates Manchester's permanent haze. 65 years in this city, she reflects as she prepares tea with careful economy using leaves that have clearly been brewed multiple times. Seen it change and stay the same, if that makes any sense. You ask what's changed and what's remained constant. Buildings got bigger, more machines, more smoke, more people crammed together. She pours tea into chipped cups with steady hands. What hasn't changed is how they see us. The factory owners, the fine folk in their big houses, still just hands to them, aren't we? Not full people. Yet Martha herself defies any attempt to reduce her to her economic function. Throughout her life, she has created meaning beyond mere survival, raising children, building community, celebrating joys, mourning losses, maintaining dignity in circumstances designed to strip it away. Found my pleasures where I could, she continues. My children, good neighbours, dancing when I was young, loved to dance, church socials, garden plot I kept for 30 years before my back gave out. Little things mostly, but they matter more than the big folk know. This capacity to create meaning within constraints, to carve out spaces for joy, connection, and self-expression in a system designed to extract maximum labour for minimum compensation, represents a profound form of resistance, not the organised political resistance of unions and worker movements, though that exists too, but a more fundamental insistence on humanity in the face of dehumanising forces. After tea, Martha walks with you through streets now settling into evening quiet. Workers have returned from factories, shops have closed, and families gather in their small lodgings for whatever evening rituals their circumstances permit. Through windows, you glimpse these domestic moments, a father reading to children from a book borrowed from the free library, a mother teaching a daughter to sew, a family singing together around a small piano in one of the more prosperous working-class homes, neighbours gathered for cards or dominoes in another. Life goes on, doesn't it? Martha says. Whatever they throw at us, that's our victory, just carrying on, making homes in hell, like Engels said, finding joy where we can. As darkness falls fully, you thank Martha for sharing her Manchester with you. Her perspective, 6 decades of direct experience in the city's working-class districts, provides context for everything else you've witnessed. She's not just survived Manchester, she's lived within it, creating meaning and community against formidable odds. You make your way back toward the commercial district, moving from the intimate scale of working-class homes to the imposing architecture of industrial power. The factories continue their relentless operation, night shifts now in progress. Manchester never truly sleeps, its industrial heart beats continuously. Near the town hall, you encounter a group of well-dressed people emerging from a charity concert, members of the same elite you observed yesterday. Their conversation revolves around the excellent performance and the substantial funds raised for poor relief. The contrast is striking, these comfortable lives proceeding alongside but separate from the realities you've witnessed in Angel Meadow and Ancoats. The charitable impulse is genuine, but the division remains unbridged. The systemic causes of poverty go unaddressed while its symptoms receive occasional inadequate attention. Yet even here, there are signs of change. Among the concert-goers is Robert Phillips, the factory owner you met at the Statistical Society, who has actually visited the slums and been changed by the experience. He speaks quietly but intently to several companions, clearly trying to convey something of what he's witnessed. "You must come and see for yourselves," you overhear him saying. "Statistics and reports don't capture the reality. Only direct observation can do that." This insistence on direct engagement, on seeing the human impact of economic arrangements rather than abstracting it into data, represents a small but significant shift. Change begins with recognition, with the refusal to look away from uncomfortable truths. As you make your final way through Manchester's streets, you reflect on everything you've witnessed. The exploitation is real and systemic. Lives shortened by dangerous working conditions, bodies broken by excessive labour, minds narrowed by limited opportunity. The suffering is not accidental, but inherent in the industrial capitalism that has made Manchester the workshop of the world. Yet the humanity persists and even flourishes in unexpected ways. People create beauty in ugly surroundings. They build communities in a system designed to isolate and divide. They find meaning beyond the economic functions assigned to them. They celebrate, mourn, love, and dream, even while struggling for basic survival. This, perhaps, is the most important lesson of Manchester in 1900, the remarkable resilience of human connection and creativity even in the most challenging circumstances. The Industrial Revolution has transformed not just production, but social relations, urban environments, and daily experience. Yet people continue to assert their full humanity within and against these transformations. As you prepare to leave this complex, terrible, fascinating city, you carry with you a deeper understanding of both industrial capitalism's devastating human costs and the countless ways people resist being reduced to mere components of the economic machine. You've seen the worst of what humans can create and the best of how they can respond to adversity. Manchester in 1900 stands at a historical crossroads. The extremes of Victorian industrial exploitation are increasingly questioned. Worker organisations are gaining strength. Social reformers are gathering evidence and proposing alternatives. Journalists are exposing conditions long hidden from public view. Even some members of the elite are beginning to recognise that change is necessary. The 20th century will bring new challenges and opportunities. Wars, economic depressions, technological changes, political movements. The particular form of industrial capitalism that shaped Manchester will evolve, though its fundamental logic will persist. Workers will continue to organise, resist, and create meaning beyond their economic roles. Night falls fully over the city, the countless factory chimneys silhouetted against the dark sky. The smoke merges with clouds, obscuring stars that would otherwise witness this moment in humanity's industrial experiment. Manchester sleeps, or rather, some of Manchester sleeps while the rest continues working, the great machine never fully stopping. You find your way back to your lodging, the images of all you've witnessed playing through your mind as you settle into bed, so different from the hard floors and shared spaces of the four-penny doss houses, yet connected to them through your newfound understanding of how industrial society functions. As you drift towards sleep, Martha's words return to you. Life goes on, doesn't it? Whatever they throw at us, that's our victory, just carrying on. The resilience she embodies, creating meaning, building community, finding joy amid hardship, offers a profound lesson that transcends her specific historical moment. In your comfortable bed, warm and safe, you appreciate anew the fundamental human capacity to create connection and meaning even in the most challenging circumstances. As sleep approaches, you carry with you not just knowledge of industrial